It was yet another cold day on the ramparts of the capital. Garrick Dargol, captain of the Lordaeron capital's garrison, looked out from the walls of the great city, the brisk air running through his helm's visor. He was on watch duty of the eastern ramparts, so he had ample time to ponder the recent happenings in the kingdom. Those happenings disgusted him. Prince Arthas had been gone for almost a month since his slaughtering of the city of Stratholme. The entitled brat had taken a sizable portion of the Lordaeron army with him on his vengeful crusade to Northrend, raving about killing some demon named Mal'Ganis and leaving the rest to police an entire kingdom descending further and further into anarchy. Garrick lamented his prince's madness. He had to watch several good friends of his depart for the icy roof of the world. His fellow captain and good friend Marwyn, his cousin and captain of the 1st Legion, Luke Valenforth, and his family's close ally, Private Gerald Soladin, who had left his farm to his son and had granted the Dargols free shelter there in these trying times. Garrick, however, decided to leverage his position and grant his wife and 2 children safe quarters in the garrison's barracks. Garrick hated how he was bound to inaction on the ramparts while his countrymen suffered of this deadly plague. The royal families had almost completely lost contact with the towns in Eastweald, save for Hearthglen. Apparently, Anderhall was now teeming with unliving monsters. The thought of his people's woes caused him to clench his gauntleted fist around the hilt of his sword, harder and harder. The things he would do to those bastard cultists if he could just get his hands on. His thoughts were interrupted by the gravelly voice of his fellow guardsman Herod, who had come to relieve Garrick of his boring duties and take his place. He always found himself wondering what Herod's mother went through at the birth of this veritable giant. As his rattling plated armor echoed through the halls of the capital city, he remembered the missive he had received that morning about how the soldiers stationed on Fenris Isle had arrested a man fleeing from Dalaran who was suspected of being a cultist in disguise and were questioning him. Garrick cursed himself for forgetting that he might have his vengeful wish after all. He was supposed to meet a Kirin Tor delegate at the gates of the city. He hurried out to find the mage Bethor Iceshard, as well as High Priest Benedictus Voss, waiting for him with annoyed glares. Garrick pretended to take note of their chastisements with ease, and Bethor teleported them straight to Fenris Keep to meet their prisoner. They entered the keep to find the guard Fenwick Thatros abruptly ending his conversation with the prisoner, saluting them, and leaving the keep's dungeon. Voss blessed them with a prayer of protection, and Bethor immediately introduced the prisoner as Thule Ravenclaw, a former mage of Dalaran and good friend of Bethor. Voss, however, sensed that Thule had a darkness in his soul and deduced that he was a member of the Cult of the Damned. Bethor was furious and demanded to know how he could betray humanity so easily, but Thule remained silent. Garrick didn't need answers to that question, though. He knew that men would do anything for the promise of great power. Garrick asked the rogue wizard who was leading the cult since the death of Kel'Thuzad. Upon Thule's continued silent staring, Garrick gladly used the excuse to vent his frustration by placing Thule's hand on the cold stone floor, laying the end of his sword hilt on the hand, and applying more and more painful pressure to the prisoner by pushing his plated sabaton down on the sword's arm guard. Eventually, Thule broke under the pain to Garrick's great pleasure, and said through gritted teeth that the leadership was split among many people, including the traitorous Baron Rivendare and a necromancer named Gandling. Satisfied with the information, the group left Thule to rot in the keep's dungeon. Bethor teleported them back to the city, where the High Priest said his farewells and left to help the town of Brill and attend a ceremony in the monastery. Bethel thanked Garrick for his torturous skills and teleported back to Dalaran, leaving Garrick to immediately send the information to the higher-ups along with a request to ride out with a small force to arrest the traitorous nobles. Days went by without a reply, and Garrick was starting to doubt his request was even noticed. One morning, he finally received a missive from Force Commander Darrington that his request had been granted. The elation Garrick felt at this quickly diminished as he read further and found out that Prince Arthas was finally returning in the evening and that he would have to stay in the capital until the end of the welcoming ceremony. Furiously, he pocketed the orders and left the ramparts once again, this time to help prepare the ceremony. It had been a long and arduous task to herd the masses of cheering citizens up onto the ramparts of the city so that they might bombard their prince with praise and petals. Garrick personally disagreed with hosting a ceremony during an epidemic of unknown proportions, but who was he to protest such a thing? He was but a loyal soldier. He took his position in the bell tower and waited. Cloaked figures approached the inner courtyard. He could barely recognize his prince and could only guess that his friend Marwyn was marching next to him. Behind him, he heard the cheers and cries of Arthas's adoring people, welcoming the returning champions home and hailing them victorious. In that moment, he envied Marwyn. His thoughts drifted aimlessly until suddenly the citizens behind him started screaming again, but this time the screams were those of bone-chilling terror. He heard a mixture of voices screaming that King Terenas II had been slain by his own son. No, surely not. Captain Dargol wheeled around to a scene reminiscent of a slaughterhouse. Citizens were dying in droves to masses of undead aberrations inside and out of the city. The Kingsguard had been completely wiped out within minutes. Garrick stared, frozen in horror, and was then suddenly slapped back into reality by Herod, furiously demanding orders. Garrick's heart now burned as a furnace of rage, fueled by the massacring of his countrymen. With a mighty war cry, he rallied the remaining defenders of the city to him, and they began fulfilling their duty. The guards fought through the crowds of undead towards the gates of the capital, where they formed a phalanx to try and contain the marauding undead, whilst creating an escape for the fleeing villagers. Wave after wave of ghouls crashed down on Dargol's men, eliminating them one by one, yet still they held firm. Garrick ordered Herod to seek out the servants of the faith in the monastery and bring them to the capital for reinforcements, and after much hesitation, Herod had grasped the reins of a fallen knight's steed and had galloped off into the night. The plagued blood of many undead drudges found itself splattered across Dargol's sword and shield, but his battle fury waned considerably when the slain Lordaeron peasants were raised into undeath before him and sent howling in his men's direction. The numbing repetition of the senseless brutality was eating away at Garrick's sanity, one citizen at a time, until a familiar face approached the dwindled phalanx. Marwyn. Garrick's sanity broke completely when he recognized Marwyn's flanking ghouls as his wife and 2 children. He dropped his sword and shield, whimpering silently as they approached. As Dargol's men succumbed around him to the endless tide of undead, he held the desiccated hand of his wife in his plated glove, not even noticing Marwyn running him through. He stared at her cold, dead eyes until darkness clouded his vision and he fell dead to the ground. Garrick awoke again, to an agony he had never known before. His flesh sloughed off his bones, and his armor immediately corroded. He stared at Marwyn's tearful gaze, now knowing the suffering he did. His body was not his own. His soul was trapped in a puppet. He was now Scourge.